All right, welcome in everyone to another deep dive. We've got a great topic today, all about taking those academic presentations to the next level. Moving past just getting the information out there and really, really captivating your audience.
Yeah, exactly. And you've sent over this super interesting resource, Mastering Academic Presentations, Advanced Strategies. So let's dig into that. What are the core elements that can take a good presentation and turn it into something truly, truly impactful?
I think a good place to start is, well, it might seem kind of obvious, but the article really stresses this. Structuring your content, introduction, body, conclusion. Like, why is that so fundamental to getting your message across in an academic setting?
I think it's how we're wired,
Yeah.
right? Like our brains naturally look for patterns and a structure to make sense of information. So when you lay out your presentation in a clear, logical way, beginning, middle, end, it gives the audience that cognitive map they need to follow along. The introduction sets the stage. It's like your thesis statement for the whole presentation.
Yeah.
Then, the body of the presentation, you're building your argument piece by piece, each point supporting the next. And then you've got the conclusion. That's where you bring it all together, driving home the key takeaway for your audience. If you don't have that logical progression, even the most brilliant research, the most amazing insights, it can get lost.
Totally. So, thinking about building that argument step by step, what are some of the key elements to make each section of your presentation, the intro, the body, the conclusion, really sing?
Well, I think the source really hits on clarity and conciseness.
Yeah.
Being very, very clear in your intro about what you're going to be covering. Not just the topic, but also what's the scope? What's the main argument you're going to be making? Then, as you move into the body, each point needs to be well supported, right? So think strategically about the evidence you're using, examples, smooth transitions between those ideas. And when you get to the conclusion, you're wrapping it all up neatly. Summarize your findings, but more importantly, articulate that key takeaway. What's the one thing you want your audience to walk away remembering?
Now, audience engagement, that's where things can get a little trickier, especially when you're dealing with complex academic material. You've got to strike that balance between detail and keeping everyone on board. What are some of the more advanced techniques, do you think, that this resource talks about for making dense topics more accessible, maybe even a little bit exciting?
I love this part. I mean, it's almost like instead of just presenting data, how do you create a narrative around it?
Right.
Can you frame your research question in a way that really hooks people in from the start? Maybe using analogies, making unexpected comparisons to eliminate complex concepts.
I like that.
The article also talks about weaving in brief stories or case studies, humanizing the data, I think they call it. And then something else that can be really powerful is posing questions throughout your presentation.
Oh, yeah.
Not necessarily for immediate answers,
Yeah.
but more to get people thinking, to keep them engaged with what you're saying.
I think those analogies can be such powerful tools because it's like you're building a bridge between something that might be unfamiliar and something that people already understand.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's talk visuals. We've all sat through those presentations where the slides are just packed with text. It's painful. The resource gives some tips on using visuals effectively. So what are some of the principles for creating slides that really enhance rather than distract from your presentation?
You hit the nail on the head. It's about support.
Yeah.
The visuals are there to support what you're saying, not replace it. So think clean, minimalist design. High contrast so people can actually read the text. Concise graphics, lots of white space, and, some obvious don'ts avoid those walls of text, distracting animations, super complex charts, and keep it focused. You want one key idea per slide because a really good visual, it acts as a memory cue. It illustrates your point in a way that just words can't. It's like a visual anchor.
All right, let's tackle the Q&A. I feel like that's the part that most presenters dread, and this source really emphasizes anticipating potential questions. What does that sort of deeper preparation look like? What would give you an edge when you're getting ready for that part of the presentation?
It's almost like you have to stress test your own work.
Yeah.
Really put yourself in the shoes of your audience. Think about the limitations of your research. Are there alternative interpretations of your findings? What kind of criticisms might people have? And be honest with yourself. What are the tough questions that you hope nobody asks, but prepare for them anyway?
Right.
Because if you have those answers ready, not only does it boost your confidence, but it also shows that you have a deep understanding of your subject matter.
And then what about when those curveballs come? This unexpected or maybe even challenging questions. How do you navigate those moments professionally and, not get flustered?
First thing is just breathe, right? Listen carefully, make sure you understand the question. Don't be afraid to ask for clarification if you need it. And if you don't know the answer, that's okay. You can just say, that's a great question. I don't have the answer off the top of my head, but I can definitely look into that and get back to you. Or, I'd encourage you to check out this resource for more information.
That's great advice.
With those tougher questions, sometimes it's about finding the underlying concern. Like, what's the real issue they're getting at? And then address that directly. Even if it means acknowledging different perspectives or limitations of your research. It's about framing the whole thing as a conversation, like we're all learning and exploring this together.
I love that. Okay, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the language we use in presentations. The article mentions some useful phrasal verbs. So first up is layout. Presenting information clearly. How would you actually use that in a presentation?
Oh, I think that's a great one, especially for transitions. Like if you're moving to a new section, you might say, now I'd like to lay out the 3 key findings from our study, or let me lay out the framework we'll be using to analyze this problem. It just signals to your audience that you're about to present things in a structured, easy to follow way.
That makes sense. Okay, what about bring forward? To propose an idea, where would that fit in?
I think that one is perfect when you're introducing something new or maybe a bit unexpected. Like, building on what we've seen so far, I'd like to bring forward a new hypothesis, or let's bring forward some alternative explanations for these trends. It emphasizes that you're presenting something fresh, something that adds to the conversation.
Nice. And then lastly, wrap up to conclude clearly. I mean, that's essential for a strong finish, right?
Totally. It's all about signaling that you're nearing the end and bringing those key points back into focus. You might say something like, to wrap up, let's revisit those core themes we discussed. Or, as we wrap up, I want to leave you with this final thought. It creates a sense of closure and helps the audience retain the main takeaways.
All right, let's move on to collocations. The first one that really jumped out at me is presentation structure. Why is consciously thinking about your presentation structure a sign of a more advanced presenter?
It shows that you understand it's not just about the content, right? It's also about how you deliver it. Having a well-thought-out presentation structure, it's like having a blueprint for success. It means you really considered the best way to guide your audience through the information and make sure it sticks.
It's like being an architect, almost. Okay, next up we have visual aids. So in the context of an advanced academic presentation, what really distinguishes effective visual aids?
I think it's about sophistication through simplicity. You're often dealing with complex information, so the visual aids need to be able to distill that down into something digestible. Maybe it's a chart that makes a complex trend instantly clear. Or using really powerful imagery that evokes a specific understanding. It's about using those visuals intentionally and strategically to amplify your message.
That's so key. Okay, and finally, audience engagement. What are some of the more nuanced ways to create audience engagement in a higher academic setting?
It goes beyond just asking questions or doing a quick poll. It's about sparking genuine intellectual curiosity. It's about creating a sense of shared discovery with your audience. So you might pose those open-ended research questions throughout your presentation, or invite brief focused discussions on certain points, or even tailor your language and examples to connect with the expertise in the room. It's about meeting them where they are and taking them on that journey with you.
So well said. Now, the article also talks about some common pitfalls to avoid. Like that shift from informal to professional language. They have that great example of swapping out, I'll talk about this thing, for something like, I will discuss this aspect in detail. Why is that so important?
I think it goes back to credibility. In an academic setting, there's a certain level of formality that's expected. And while you want to be approachable, your language should reflect the rigor of your research.
It's about striking that balance. Okay, and then there's the classic trap of information overload on slides. The article emphasizes using concise slides with just the essential data. I feel like that's a constant struggle.
Oh, for sure. But always remember, you are the expert. You're the one providing the deeper explanation. Those slides, they're just there to support what you're saying, not to be a script that you read off of.
Less is more. And then there's the filler words, right? The ums and ahs that can creep in. The advice is to practice and consciously slow down your pace.
It makes a world of difference. When you slow down, you give yourself time to think, so you're less likely to rely on those filler words. And the more you practice, the more comfortable and confident you become, which also helps to minimize them.
It's about that mindful delivery. And along those same lines, managing nervousness, taking those pauses, maintaining a steady pace. Easy to say, harder to do when you're up there.
Absolutely. But those pauses, they're not just for you. They give the audience a chance to process what you're saying, especially when it's complex information. And that steady pace, it projects confidence and a sense of control over your material.
Those bonus tips in the article are pure gold, like recording yourself, rehearsing, getting honest feedback. It can be tough to watch yourself, but so valuable.
It's like having another set of eyes and ears on your presentation. You can catch things you might not notice otherwise, and it just helps you to refine your delivery.
And then there's using rhetorical questions, incorporating those strategic pauses to give your audience a moment to reflect.
It's so subtle, but it's so effective. It turns your presentation into a dialogue, encouraging people to actively think about what you're saying rather than just passively listening.
And then, of course, you have the clear, simple visuals, preparing for the Q&A in advance, and really paying attention to your body language. It all adds up.
It all contributes to that overall impression you make as a presenter. Those nonverbal cues, the eye contact, the natural gestures, they reinforce your message and help to build that connection with your audience.
It's all about that holistic approach. And then finally, that emphasis on continuous improvement, seeking feedback, always striving to get better.
Every presentation is a learning experience. Feedback helps you refine your skills and become a more effective communicator.
So for our listeners out there, here's a final challenge for you. Imagine you're in the middle of your presentation and someone throws you a curveball question. How could you use one of those phrasal verbs and one of those collocations we've been talking about to respond professionally and keep the conversation flowing? Maybe think about how you could bring forward a related point to address the question while ensuring that your overall presentation structure stays on track and you don't lose that audience engagement.
Love that. It's all about putting these strategies into practice.
This has been a great deep dive. We've covered so much ground, from the fundamentals of presentation structure to the finer points of language and handling those tough questions. Remember, the goal is to communicate your ideas with clarity and impact. Thanks for joining us, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.